My name is Delia Rourke. I am 38 years old and I can stand in a doorway and tell you what a house weighs. That sounds like a strange thing to be good at. It is the whole job. I restore old houses. And before you touch anything in a 100-year-old building, you have to know what is holding it up and what is only pretending to. There are walls that look load-bearing and are decorative. There are decorative walls holding up an entire second floor because somebody in 1953 did something stupid and got away with it. You learn to knock and listen. You learn that the thing carrying the most weight is very often the thing nobody looks at. I have built exactly one house from the dirt up in my life, and I built it on 11 acres my grandmother left me in 2015, and it took me 2 years and 11 months, and I set most of the roof myself in a November so cold the nail gun kept jamming. On the 20th of November last year, I checked into a hospital for a spinal fusion. 2 levels, lower back, a surgery I had been putting off for 4 years, because I am self-employed and self-employed people do not have a good month to be flat on their back. My family knew. Everyone knew. My mother had known since us guessed, 6 days before the surgery. She called me and told me Thanksgiving was cancelled that year so I could rest. I said that was kind. I remember saying that. I said, that is really kind, Mom. At 4:40 in the afternoon on Thanksgiving Day, 28 hours after they closed my back, I picked up my phone off a hospital tray table with one hand, because the other one had a line in it, and I saw a motion alert from a camera mounted above my own front door. 14 people. Coats. Casserole dishes. My mother in the front with a key. Welcome back to Evelyn's quiet table, where ordinary people face impossible family moments and walk out with their dignity intact. If you have ever been the one they made plans around, instead of with, pull up a chair, drop a comment and tell me where you are watching from, and be sure to subscribe. I did not scream. I could not have physically. What I did over the next 18 hours is the reason I am telling you this, and I want to be honest up front. The camera was never my weapon. The camera was my warning. The call, that cancelled. Let me give you the call because it is a small masterpiece, and I did not recognize it at the time. My mother is named Corinne Rourke. She is 66, she taught 4th grade for 31 years, and she is the most organized human being I have ever met. She has never in her life forgotten a birthday. She has never once shown up somewhere without a dish. She called me on the 14th of November. She said, "Sweetheart, I have been thinking. We are going to skip Thanksgiving this year." I said, "Skip it?" She said, "You are going to be 6 days out of surgery. I am not having everybody descend on somebody who just had her spine rebuilt. It is not the year for it." Now, if you have a mother like mine, you already know that the plural pronoun is doing enormous work in that sentence. Everybody descend on somebody. She did not say descend on you. She said descend on somebody. I did not catch it. I was 6 days from anesthesia and my back hurt, and my mother had just told me I did not have to host, and I felt about 20 pounds lighter. Because here is what she was not saying, and what I did not think about until much later. Thanksgiving had been at my house for 4 straight years. Not because anybody asked me. Because the house is the biggest one anybody in my family has ever had access to, and it has a great room with a 12-foot ceiling. And the first year I finished it my mother said, "Oh, we have to do the holiday here." And that was that 4 years of me hosting 14 to 19 people. 4 years of me cooking a 22-pound bird in an oven I installed myself, and in year 5, the year my back was in pieces, she called to tell me it was cancelled. I said thank you. I actually said thank you. She said, "You just rest, we will do something in December." Then she said one more thing, and this is the line I have turned over about 900 times since. She said, "Do not worry about anything out there. I will keep an eye on the place." Out there. The place, she had a key. Of course she had a key. She had had a key since 2019, and she had it because I gave it to her, in a moment of straightforward daughterly love, in case something happened while I was on a job site 3 counties over. I have thought a lot about whether giving her that key was the mistake. I have decided it was not. The key was fine. The key was correct. What I got wrong was much smaller and much more common than a key. I never once told anybody in my family what that house actually was to me. I let them experience it as a venue. 2 years, 11 moves, and a roof I set myself. My grandmother's name was Maeve. She left me 11 acres, a collapsing barn, and about $4,000, and she left my mother the house she actually lived in, which was worth considerably more. And nobody in the family has ever fully forgiven the fact that I got the land. I want to explain why she did it, because it matters. Maeve and I built things. That was our whole relationship. From the time I was about 6, whenever I was at her place, we were fixing something. She taught me to cut a rafter tail. She taught me the difference between a nail that is holding and a nail that is just present. She was 71 years old and she owned a worm drive saw. When I was 19 and told my parents I was not going to college and was instead going to apprentice with a restoration carpenter named Bill Sabo, my mother cried for 2 days. My father said I was throwing away a brain. Maeve drove 90 minutes to Bill Sabo's shop, uninvited, and looked at his work, and then took me to a diner and said, "He is good, go." She died in 2015, I was 27. The will left me the acreage with one line attached to it and the line said, "For Delia, who will know what to do with it." I broke ground in 2016. I want to be clear that I did not build that house alone. Nobody builds a house alone. I hired out the foundation, the septic, the electrical rough-in, and the drywall, because those are the 4 things you do not do yourself unless you are a fool. I did the rest, 2 years and 11 months. I was 30 when I started and almost 33 when I moved in. I worked jobs during the week and my own house on weekends, and there were entire seasons where I did not see another human being on a Saturday. The roof I did in November of 2018. I want to tell you about that November because it comes back later. It was 26 degrees with a wind. I had a crew of 2 for 3 days and then they went to a paying job. And I had 11 squares left and a forecast. And I did them over 4 days by myself with a nail gun that kept jamming because the oil was thickening in the cold. My family knew I was building. They asked about it the way you ask about somebody's diet. My brother Colm, who is 2 years older and sells medical devices, came out once, in 2017, stood in the framing for about 11 minutes, said wow, big, and left. Nobody helped. Not 1 hour, not 1 weekend. And I did not ask which I own, because I have never in my life asked anybody in my family for anything, and I have come to understand that this is not the virtue I spent 20 years telling myself it was. There is one thing from that November roof that I have never told anybody, and I am going to tell you. On the 3rd day, the wind came up out of the northwest at about 18 miles an hour, and I was on a 612 pitch at 22 feet with a harness anchored to a ridge strap, and I sat down on the sheathing because I could not feel my fingers well enough to trust the gun. I sat up there for maybe 20 minutes. The sun was going down over the tree line on land my grandmother had walked. I could see the roof of my parents' house about 1.5 miles south, the lights on in the kitchen. I took out my phone and I got as far as opening the thread with my brother's name on it. I typed, "Any chance you could come out Saturday? It is just me up here." I looked at it for a long time, then I deleted it, 1 character at a time, and I put the phone back in my jacket, and I picked the gun back up, and I did another 2 squares before the light went. I have thought about that deleted text more than almost anything else in this story. Because when I finally got angry, months later, at 14 people in my great room, part of what I was angry about was that nobody helped. And the honest truth is that I had the message written, and I chose not to send it. I did not want help. I wanted to be seen needing it and rescued anyway, without ever having to say the words out loud. That is not a family problem. That is a me problem, and it took a spinal fusion and a doorbell camera for me to look straight at it. I moved in on the 4th of March, 2019. I sat on the floor of the great room that night, with a folding chair and a space heater, and I cried harder than I have ever cried about anything, and then I called my mother, and she said, "That is wonderful, honey. When can we see it?" They saw it 8 months later, at Thanksgiving, when 19 of them came. I want to give you the hospital part accurately, because I think people imagine drama, and it was not dramatic. It was slow and beige and boring. Surgery was Wednesday the 20th. 2-level fusion, about 4.5 hours. I woke up at around 3 in the afternoon, with the specific dull surprise of a body that has been rearranged. Thursday was Thanksgiving. I was 1 day post-op. I had walked 11 feet to a door and back with a physical therapist named Denny, which is an enormous accomplishment that feels like nothing. And then I had slept for 4 hours. My mother texted at 11:20 that morning. It said, "Happy Thanksgiving, my brave girl. Resting here. Thinking of you." Resting here at 4:40 in the afternoon, my phone buzzed with a motion alert. I have a camera above the front door. It is not a security system. It is a doorbell camera that I put up in 2020 because I get deliveries of hardware and I wanted to know when a truck came. It records 30 seconds when something moves and it stores clips for 14 days and I had genuinely almost forgotten it existed. I opened it with my thumb. The clip was 30 seconds long. It showed my mother on my porch with a covered dish and a key in her hand. Behind her, my Aunt Sheila. Behind Sheila, my cousin Grady carrying a folding table. Behind Grady, 4 more people I could not immediately identify, and a line of cars down my gravel drive that I could see all the way to the county road. I watched it 4 times. Then I did something I am not sure I can defend, which is that I opened the live view. Because here is a thing that I had genuinely never thought about in 5 years of owning that camera. When there is a delivery, you check the clip. When there is a party inside your house that you were told did not exist, you can just watch. The porch camera does not see inside. But the front door of that house has a sidelight window, and the great room is straight through, and the angle catches about 8 feet of my own kitchen island. I lay flat on my back in a hospital bed with a drain in my spine, and I watched my family's Thanksgiving through a window I installed myself. If you are watching this and part of you is doing arithmetic about your own family right now, about who has your key and who would use it, I see you. Subscribe and stay with me, because what I heard on that camera at 7:52 that night is the reason none of the rest of it went the way they planned. I counted 14 people over the course of about 2 hours. My mother, my father Owen, my brother Colm and his wife, Evelyn and their 2 boys, Aunt Sheila and Uncle Rob, my cousin Grady and his girlfriend, 2 of my mother's friends from church, Pat and Dolores, who I have met perhaps 6 times in my life, and 2 people I never identified at all. They used the great room. Of course they did. That is what the great room is for, and I built it to be used, and there is a part of me, even now, that watched a room I made hold 14 people on a holiday and felt something that was not entirely rage. That is the confusing part nobody tells you about. I built that room to be full. It was full, and I was not in it. They brought a folding table because my dining table seats 10, which they knew because they had eaten at it. At about 5:30 somebody found my good serving platters. I know because they came out. It is a set of 3, stoneware, that I bought at an estate sale in 2019 and used twice a year. At about 6 my brother Colm went out to his truck and came back with a case of beer, and I watched him set it down on my island, on the walnut, with no coaster and no board. And I lay in that bed and thought about the fact that I had that countertop with 4 coats of a penetrating oil over 3 weekends in the spring of 2018. I want you to understand the size of what I was feeling and the size of what I was not feeling. I was not feeling violated in the way you would expect. Nothing was being stolen. Nobody was breaking anything. My mother had a key I gave her, and she was hosting a family holiday in a beautiful room. And if you had shown that live view to a stranger with no context, they would have said, "What a lovely family." What I was feeling was much more specific and much colder. I was watching a room full of people I am related to enjoy something I made, on a day they had told me was cancelled, while I was 22 miles away with staples in my back, and not one of the 14 had texted me, not one. I checked. I have the phone. Between my mother's 11:20 message and 8 that night, I received 0 texts from any person in that house. 14 people, 7 hours, a holiday, and my phone did not make a sound. That is not an oversight. 14 people cannot all forget. That is a decision made silently and separately by 14 individuals, each one of whom probably thought, "I will call her tomorrow when she is not so out of it." Every single one of them was letting somebody else do it. There is a name for that in my trade, sort of. When a load has no clear path down to the footing, you get what is called distributed failure. Nothing breaks. Everything sags a little. And because no single member failed, there is nobody to blame and nothing to replace. And the floor is just permanently, quietly out of level, and everyone learns to walk on it. That is what 14 unsent texts looks like. Nothing broke. Everything sagged. I lay there and I watched Aisling take a photograph of the table. I know she took it because the flash caught in the sidelight. She posted it that night. I saw it the next morning. The caption said, "Grateful for these people." There were 31 likes on it by noon. 4 of them were from cousins who were not in the room. One of them, and I am not going to pretend this did not sting the worst of all, was from my mother's friend Dolores, who was standing 11 feet away from the person taking the photograph, in a house belonging to a woman who was not tagged in it and did not appear in it and had not been mentioned. I looked at that photograph for a long time on Friday morning. You know what I finally noticed? The angle. Aisling had shot it from the kitchen side. framing down the length of the table toward the windows, which is the exact composition anybody would pick, because that is the best sight line in the room. I know it is the best sight line in the room, because I moved that window opening 8 inches to the left in 2017 specifically so that it would be. They were photographing my decisions and calling them these people. At 6:48 my father stood up. I could see about a third of him through the sidelight, from the chest down, holding a glass. I could hear him, because the camera has a microphone, and the front door was by that point in the evening, standing partly open, because 14 people in a room with a fire going gets hot fast. I know that room, I sized that fireplace, I got most of it, not all. The audio on a doorbell camera is not good and the room had noise in it. He said something about being grateful. He said something about the boys. He said something about Sheila's hip being better. And then he said, and this part came through completely clean because he raised his voice for it, and here is to Delia, who is not with us, and who I think we can all agree would want us to be here. Laughter. Warm laughter, the good kind, and then my mother, closer to the door, and therefore louder on the recording than my father, said the sentence. She said, honestly, it is nice. It is just a little bit peaceful this year. Somebody laughed. Aunt Sheila, I think, and my mother said, oh, do not, you know what I mean, she hovers. I want to tell you that this destroyed me. It did not. It landed somewhere much stranger. Because here is the thing, and I have had a year to think about it, and I have decided to be truthful even though it does not flatter me. She was not wrong, I do hover. I have hosted 4 Thanksgivings in that house, and at every one of them I have been on my feet the entire day. I have refilled things nobody asked to have refilled. I have taken a plate out of somebody's hand while they were still eating off it. My cousin Grady once said, Delia, sit down. And I said, in a minute, and never did. I hover because I do not know how to be in a room I built without being in service to it. I do not know how to be a guest at my own table. If I sit down, I am just a person. And I have never once in my life felt like just a person is enough to earn a seat. So my mother said she hovers, and 14 people laughed, and lying in that bed with my back full of hardware, what I felt was not fury. What I felt was the specific grief of hearing an accurate description of yourself delivered by someone who has never once asked why you are like that. They did not want me there because I make the day into work, and I make the day into work because I have never believed that showing up empty-handed as a person, rather than as a service, would be enough for them. That is a loop. I had been inside it for about 15 years, and I had never once seen the outside of it, until I was flat on my back, looking at it through a doorbell camera. That was 6:48. If the night had ended there, this would be a very different story, and I probably would have let all of it go. At 7:52, my brother went out on the porch to take a phone call. Scoove and stay with me, because he had no idea he was standing 4 feet under a microphone. The clip is 1 minute and 14 seconds. That is the maximum the camera records on a continuous motion event. Colm came out with a beer and stood at the rail. He was not on the phone. He came out with my father. The audio is clear because they were 4 feet from the device and speaking at a normal volume in a quiet night, and because they had no idea it was there. Nobody looks up at a doorbell. My father said, did you talk to her about it? Colm said, not yet. She was out of it yesterday. My father said something I cannot make out, and Colm said, and I am going to give you this word for word because I have listened to it 200 times. Mom thinks tomorrow is the right time. She will be on the pain stuff. She will be tired and she will not want to fight about it. Mom is going to bring it up soft, just the trust idea, get it in her head. Then Barry can do the paperwork the week after. My father said, you think she will go for it? And Colm said, she will not say no to Mom on a Friday when she cannot stand up. I want to be very precise about what that was and what it was not, because I spent a long time afterward, making sure I understood it correctly before I did anything. Barry is Barry Nolan. He is married to my mother's cousin. He is a real estate attorney in the next county over. The trust idea had come up exactly once before, at Easter, in a conversation I had dismissed as nothing. My mother had said something about how it would be smart, at some point, to get the property into a family trust for everybody's protection. And I had said something non-committal and passed the potatoes. Here is the thing about a family trust in a conversation like that one. It is not a scam. There is no fraud in it. It is a real legal instrument and it has real legitimate uses, and Barry Nolan is not a criminal. What it does, in the version being discussed on my porch, is move 11 acres and a house that I own outright into an entity with more than one person's name on the decisions. It is not theft, it is dilution. And once it is done, it is extraordinarily difficult and expensive to undo. And everyone involved gets to be genuinely offended if you try, because after all, it was for everybody's protection. They were not planning to rob me. That is what I need you to hear. In their own heads, not one of those people was doing anything wrong. My mother had decided that her daughter owning 11 acres alone was a problem to be solved. And she had picked the day to solve it. And the day she picked was the day I would be on narcotics and unable to sit upright. She was going to bring it up soft. I went back to Easter after that, in my head, and I found the conversation I had thrown away. We had been on the back deck. My mother had a glass of wine. She said, "Do you know what happens if something happens to you?" I said, "I have a will." She said, "I know you do, honey. But a will goes through probate, and probate is public, and it takes 18 months, and in the meantime nobody can do anything with the place." Then she said, "Barry says a trust just avoids all of that. Barry says." At Easter I heard a mother being morbid about her daughter's mortality, which is an annoying but ordinary thing that mothers do, and I changed the subject. Sitting in room 314, I heard something else entirely. I heard that my mother had already had a conversation with a real estate attorney about my property, before she ever mentioned it to me. The consultation had happened first. The concern was assembled afterward. That reordering is the whole thing. It is the difference between a worried parent and a plan. And I want to be fair, because I have been fair about her all the way through this, and I am not going to stop now. I do not think Corinne Rourke wanted my land. I have never once thought that. She has a house and a pension, and she does not want 11 acres. What she was her biggest asset to not be under the sole control of the daughter who did not go to college, who left at 19 to work for a carpenter, and who has been, in her mother's private estimation, one bad decision away from disaster since 2008. She was not being greedy. She was being certain she knew better. In some ways that is worse, because greed you can negotiate with. I lay there in room 314 with my phone about 6 inches from my face, and I felt the entire evening reorganize itself. The dinner was not the point. The dinner was a staging area. They had not canceled Thanksgiving so I could rest. They had canceled Thanksgiving so that 14 people could be aligned and fed and pleasant and unanimous in my own great room. The night before somebody sat on the edge of my hospital bed and brought it up soft. I did not call anybody that night. I want to be honest about the first hour, because the first hour was bad. The first hour I lay there and shook, and a nurse named Priya came in at about 8:30 and asked if my pain had spiked, and I said yes, because it was easier than the truth, and she gave me something, and I fell asleep. Angry. I woke up at 4 in the morning completely clear. Here is what I understood at 4 in the morning, and it is the only genuinely useful thing I have ever gotten out of being furious. I had 18 hours. They thought they were bringing a surprise to a woman who could not stand up. What they had actually done was hand me 18 hours of advance notice and a recording. And there is no version of a soft conversation that survives the other person knowing the script. So I did 4 things between 4 a.m. and 10 a.m. on Friday, and I did all of them from a hospital bed on a phone, and not one of them was dramatic. The first thing I did was download the clips. Both of them. The 4:40 arrival and the 7:52 porch conversation. I emailed them to myself, and then I emailed them to a second address, because I have been in enough disputes over construction contracts to know that a thing that exists in one place does not exist. The second thing I did was call my own attorney. Her name is Ruth Amako, and she has handled my contracts since 2017. I called her office at 8 in the morning, on the day after Thanksgiving, fully expecting a machine. And Ruth picked up on the 3rd ring, because Ruth is a person who works on the Friday after Thanksgiving. I told her the whole thing. It took 11 minutes. She was quiet for a second, and then she said something that changed the entire shape of my day. She said, "Delia, before anything else, is there anything with your signature on it from the last 36 hours? I said no, just consent forms. She said, "Good. Do not sign anything at all until you are off the narcotics. Not a card, not a form, not a receipt with a note on it." Listen to me carefully. If somebody puts a document in front of you while you are on that medication and you sign it, undoing it is possible, but it is a year of your life and about $40,000. Do not create that problem. Just do not sign. Then she said, "Do you want me there?" And I said, "Can you be?" She said, "What time do they usually come?" I said my mother had texted that she would be by around 11. Ruth said, I will be there at 10:30. The third thing I did was ask the nurse a question. I asked Priya whether the hospital had a policy about notaries. She looked at me for a second and then she said, in the flat, careful voice of somebody who has seen a thing before, we do. We do not permit outside notaries at the bedside for patients receiving scheduled pain medication without an evaluation. Do you need me to put something in your chart? I said, what would you put? She said, that you have requested no legal or financial documents be presented to you during your admission, and that you have requested your attorney be present for any non-medical discussion. It goes in the chart and it goes on the door. I said yes, please. And Priya, who was about 26 years old and had been on shift since 7:09 p.m., said, Ms. Rourke, we do this more than you would think. Usually it is somebody's kids. I asked her how often. She thought about it and said, on this floor? Maybe once a month. Somebody shows up on day 2 with papers. Then she straightened my blanket and said the thing I have since repeated to about 9 different people. She said, day 2 is the day. Everybody assumes the danger is when you are unconscious. It is not. It is day 2. When you are awake enough to sign your name and tired enough to agree with anybody who loves you. The fourth thing I did was the hardest, and I did it last, at about 9:40, and I want to tell you exactly what it was. I texted my mother. I did not accuse her of anything. I did not mention the camera. I have thought very hard about whether that was cowardice, and I have concluded it was not, because I did not need her to know what I knew. I needed the conversation not to happen. The text said, morning. Rough night. My attorney Ruth is coming by at 10:30 to go over some business things while I have a clear window, so if you come at 11 she may still be here, just so you are not surprised. 3 dots appeared. They appeared and stopped and appeared and stopped, and this went on for 4 minutes. What finally came through was, oh, no problem at all, honey. Maybe I will come later so you are not overwhelmed. Love you. She did not come at 11. She did not come that day. Ruth Amako came at 10:30 anyway. She brought a coffee she was not allowed to give me, and she sat in the vinyl chair by the window for 2 hours. And for most of that time neither of us talked about my family at all. She told me about her son's hockey team. I told her about a 1912 Foursquare in Belhaven with a foundation problem that was going to be somebody's nightmare in about 2 years. At about 12:30 she said, you know she is going to come while I am not here. I said I knew. She said, so what do you want to have happen? And I said the thing that I had been assembling since 4 that morning. I said, I do not want a fight. I do not want anybody exposed. I want it to be over without a single person in that family ever getting to have the argument, because the argument is the part they are good at. Ruth said, then you do not need me. You need a piece of paper and a boring sentence. We drafted it together on her laptop, in a hospital room, in about 20 minutes. It was 4 sentences long. It was addressed to nobody. It was not a legal instrument at all, which is the part I love most about it. It said, roughly, that the property at that address is held solely in my name, that I have no intention now, or in the future of transferring it into any shared entity, trust, or partnership, that I will not be discussing the matter, and that any document concerning it that arrives in any form will be forwarded to Ruth Amoko, whose contact information was printed at the bottom. Ruth said, you want to send this? I said, no. My mother came on Sunday, 3 days after Thanksgiving. She brought soup in a jar and a small potted plant, and she was, I want to be fair, genuinely worried about me. That is the part that people who have not lived it will not understand. She loved me, and she was scared for my back, and she had also spent Thursday night planning the Friday, and both of those things were completely true, at the same time in the same woman. She sat in the vinyl chair. We talked about the physical therapy. We talked about Dolores's granddaughter, and at about the 50-minute mark she said, you know, sweetheart, when you are back on your feet, I would love to sit down with you and Barry sometime. Nothing urgent. Just some housekeeping about the property that would make things simpler down the road. There it was, soft. Exactly as advertised. It was such a small, warm, reasonable sentence, and I said, not angrily, I did not have the muscle tone to be angry, just no. She said, oh, I am not saying now, honey, I just mean eventually. And I said, no, not now and not eventually. I am not putting the property in a trust with anyone. It is not going to happen, and I do not want to talk about it. And I am not going to talk about it again. She said, Delia, you do not even know what I am proposing. and this is the only moment in the whole story where I came close to using what I had. I looked at her, and I thought about the clip, and about she hovers, and about 14 people who did not text, and I felt the entire thing rise up in my chest ready to go, and then I did not. I said, Mom, I do know, and I am not angry. But the answer is no, and it is going to keep being no, and the only thing that can happen if we keep talking about it is that we hurt each other. She sat there for a moment, then she picked up her purse and she said, well, I think that is a very hard way to be about family. And she left the plant, and she left. The plant was a small jade. I still have it. It is on the windowsill above my kitchen sink, and it has grown considerably, and I water it on Sundays. I have been asked why I kept it. I think it is because it is the only true thing she gave me that day. She meant the soup, and she meant the plant, and she meant the worry. She also meant Barry. People can hand you both at once, and you are allowed to keep the plant. What he kept here is the rest of it, honestly. Nobody was ever confronted. I have never told my mother about the camera. I have never played the clip for anyone except Ruth Amoako. My brother does not know that I know, and I have made peace with the fact that he probably never will. I have been asked by the 2 friends I told why I did not use it. The answer is that I built that house, and I know what happens when you remove something load-bearing to prove a point. The clip would have won me an argument and cost me a family, and after 18 hours of thinking about it in the dark, I found that I did not want to win the argument. I wanted the trust idea to die and everybody else to live. It died. Barry Nolan never called. The subject has come up 0 times in the 14 months since. Colm called me in March. It was the only call in this entire story that surprised me. He did not apologize, because he did not know there was anything to apologize for. He called to ask whether I would look at a wall in his basement that had a crack in it. I drove over on a Saturday. The crack was nothing, a shrinkage crack in a poured wall, the kind every house in that county has, and I told him so in about 90 seconds. Then we stood in his basement for another 40 minutes, because neither of us left. At some point he said, "Can I ask you something? Why did you build that house so big?" I said, "What?" He said, "It is a lot of house for one person." I have always wondered and I never asked. And there it was, 7 years. The first time anybody in my family had asked me a question about that building that was not about how many people it could seat. I told him the truth, which I had never said out loud to anyone. I said, "Because Grandma left me the land, and the note said she thought I would know what to do with it, and I wanted, whatever I did, to be big enough that nobody could say she was wrong." Colm looked at the floor for a while, then he said, "Huh." And then he said, "That is a lot of weight for a house," which, coming from a man who sells medical devices, and once stood in my framing for 11 minutes and said, "Wow, big," was the single most perceptive thing anyone in my family has ever said to me. I did not tell him about the camera. I still have not. But something in me put the clip down that afternoon in a basement, over a crack that was nothing. Thanksgiving last year was at my brother's house, and I went and I sat down. That is the actual ending, and it is much smaller than the story deserves. I drove out there and I brought a pie I bought at a grocery store, and I sat down in a chair at 2:00 in the afternoon, and I did not get up except to use the bathroom. I did not clear a single plate. My Aunt Sheila asked me twice if I wanted to help, and I said, "No thank you, I am good here," and the second time she gave me a very strange look. It was the hardest thing I have ever done in a living room. My hands did not know what to do. Around hour 2 I caught myself starting to stand up when somebody's glass was empty, and I had to physically put my palm flat on my own knee. Nobody thanked me for anything, because I did not do anything, and nothing bad happened. The day just went on around me, and at the end of it my father said, "Good to have you," and meant it, and I drove home. I changed the locks in February, not dramatically. My back healed enough to hold a drill in February, so I changed them in February, the way you would change a filter. Nobody has a key now. Nobody has asked for one, which tells me they know, and I have decided that the fact that nobody asked is the closest thing to an apology that family is capable of issuing. The camera is still up. I have not taken it down, and I have not looked at it in anger since. Here is the thing I actually want to leave you with, and it is not about cameras or trusts or lawyers. For 15 years I believed that the way to be loved in my family was to be indispensable. Build the biggest house, host the holiday, refill the glass before it is empty, never sit down, never ask for a thing. I thought that being the one who carries the weight was the same as being the one who belongs. It is not. I found that out lying flat on my back, listening to my own mother, Tell 14 people that it was peaceful without me. A load-bearing wall is not loved. It is relied upon. Those are different, and the difference is that nobody ever asks a wall how it is doing. If you are the wall in your family, you are allowed to stop. Not by leaving, not by making a scene, just by sitting down, in a chair, at somebody else's Thanksgiving, with your hands in your lap, and finding out whether the room stays up without you. Mine stayed up. That is the part I did not expect. The room was fine. It turns out I was never holding it up. I was only ever standing in it, doing arithmetic, waiting for somebody to notice how much I was carrying, and one more piece of practical truth, because it is the most useful thing in this entire story, and I want somebody to take it home. If you are ever in a bed, on medication, and somebody who loves you sits down and asks you to sign something for everybody's protection, you say, "Not while I am on this medication." That is a complete sentence. You do not need a lawyer to say it, and you do not need to accuse anybody of anything. Just, "Not while I am on this medication." It costs you nothing, and it can save you a year of your life. That is my story. 14 people, 1 doorbell camera, and 18 hours of a warning nobody meant to give me. If you have ever been the one everyone plans around instead of with, hear me. Being needed is not the same as being wanted. And you are allowed to find out which one you have. Share this with someone who needs to hear it tonight. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I will see you at the table.